complex question, and I'm going to start by I've mentioned it earlier on. The first one's from Bob Chapman, and he said that people share their gifts with you whenever they feel cared for. And in particular, he used that quote: "I won't go to my grave feeling proud of the products and services we built. I'll go to my grave proud of the people who built our products and services." And whenever we make people our purpose, we can heal a lot of the brokenness in the world. So
before we begin today's episode, I'd like to express sincere thanks to all of our wonderful guests who shared their time with me on the show. I'd also like to thank, importantly, all of you, our listeners, again, spanning right across the globe, and our listenership is increasing season on season. I have an appeal. We continue to keep the podcast sponsor free, and I know that's really important to you, the listeners, and we produce it at our own cost. So if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please, 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 can I ask you now to take 10 seconds to do just that, as it really helps the show and the quality of guests that we can continue to attract. And the guests this season, again, have been absolutely world class. As ever, a huge thanks for all the really positive feedback. Again, this helps. So please, if you haven't already and you're enjoying the show, can you take 2 minutes just to let us know, just to share some of that with you? Awesome deep dives into the business of scaling. Loved the Dan Sullivan episodes. So amazing. Decades of experience condensed into 60 minutes. The range of contributors, topics, and perspectives I can access in these podcast series would rival the world's leading business schools. High praise indeed. So if you're enjoying the podcast, why not subscribe to our ScaleX Insider 321 newsletter, where each week we provide you with 3 timeless takeaways, 2 inspirational quotes, and 1 reflection question to support your scaling psyche. We've always talked about the importance of journaling and reflection as a part of your own self-leadership. So the newsletter prompts you to do that. Now, without further ado, Claire, you're very, very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast.
thank you for having me back. And can I start by congratulating you? Huge congratulations on conducting your 100th episode of the ScaleX Insider.
Thank you so much. Incredible to think that at the start of this journey, it was just about getting 6 episodes recorded and really leaning into it beyond that. And what a 100th guest interview episode that was. It was the culmination of our own vision crafted a number of years ago, where we held Ireland's first business scaling summit. And I interviewed Mr. Stephen Bartlett live on stage in front of 500 guests. And what an interview that was in the context of what the value that Stephen provided. So thank you, Claire.
It made it even more special, the fact that the interview was live, and you couldn't have got a more special guest. And I was listening to the season 10, and I picked out from Philip McKernan, who called out the disconnect that he sometimes experiences between speakers whenever they're on stage, compared to what they're like whenever they're in the green room. I have to say, you'd met Stephen Bartlett. Owen McErlane, our colleague, met Stephen Bartlett, and as his, what we term, buddy, who took him from the hotel to the venue, his feedback couldn't have been better in terms of Stephen's humility behind the scenes, his manners, his friendliness, and certainly he wasn't disappointed to have met one of his own heroes. So I think just understanding the character just really helps to understand the guest and where they're coming from. So I think it was worth calling that out.
That resonates. One's experience with Stephen resonates with my own experience and the experience of his team, who were brilliant right from the outset. Sophie, Meg, I'll give those ladies a shout out in the backroom team, and then Will and Dom, who accompanied Stephen on the day. So thank you for making it a wonderful experience and a brilliant interview. So getting straight into it then, Claire, speaking of guests and interviews, what were your reflections from season 10? Because I know this was a season that you deeply enjoyed. We went deeper. We went deeper on the people side of things. So I'm really excited to hear about your reflections from this season.
Brilliant. Well, you're quite right. You know, starting off with the depth of the exploration you went into, the fact that now you are probably there was so much valuable content that you struggled to fit it into the hour, and instead of editing it out and landing on the editor's floor, you actually wrapped it up to create part two of an incredible conversation. So that was with three of your guests, so that was really valuable, and actually I would encourage you to do more of that. uh, I'm going to call something out as well. Philip McKernan said, and this one's for you. And at the end of Philip's interview, he thanked you for creating the space for the wisdom to flow. And I think the way that you continue to position the questions, and you do such an incredible amount of research to get the best out of every single interview, is really worth shouting out. And I think I'm saying that on behalf of all of your listeners, based on the feedback that you continue to get with the podcast. So honestly, well done for that.
That's really
And
kind. Thank
I
you.
think as well, the your guests continue to be really open and vulnerable, and you would mentioned there the depth. um, I actually found myself, probably for the first time ever, getting quite emotional at a number of the concepts. And in fact, it was one morning my husband had gone out to walk the dog, and he came back, and I was sitting, probably struggling to get my words out, just full of emotion. And that came from uh, one of the interviews with Raj Sisioda. And it was just, I just want to say thanks to Raj for the depth that he showed, the vulnerability that he displayed, and sharing his own very personal story with all of your listeners. So it was absolutely incredible. And one thing that's really important for me to say before we move beyond the reflections, that actually really only struck me recently, that my background, I come from the world of talent leadership and HR, and I've always been responsible for managing a budget for learning. And I know what it felt like to make sure that I was identifying what capabilities we needed across the organization, and making sure that I was investing the budget in learning really wisely. And sometimes, because the budget was maybe tight, that required me to be even more creative with how I spent it. And in terms of, you making an appeal for your listeners, I would appeal to any listeners out there who are managing a learning and development budget, or responsible for that leadership development in any way. Take these episodes, listen to them collectively as a group, regroup around the table to discuss your learnings, and then extract the practical takeaways that you can as a result of it, because it's free. It's such a valuable resource to develop leadership teams. And I say it's beyond many of the leadership development programs that I have ever either attended or that I have organized for leadership teams. So, in the same way that I listen to each season and then offer you my commitments and come back at the end of every season, the end of every quarter, to check in on those commitments, I would appeal and urge to anyone in the role of talent or HR to do exactly the same thing with their leadership teams, because
Here,
it's an
here.
incredible way to learn.
You're singing my song, Claire. And before we move on to your distillation, or what you discerned as the key themes from the season, I want to pick up on something you said about the openness and vulnerability that was shown by our guest this season. And having been CEO of a scaling organization for 13 years, and I was a young CEO, my perception was always to appear bulletproof, to avoid showing displays of vulnerability. That's what I perceived was important from a leadership perspective. What would you say to leaders in relation to showing displays of vulnerability, and when is that appropriate? When is it not? When without contriving it, when can it be used as a source of inspiration for others and a galvanizing of your team?
That's a fantastic question. And I guess vulnerability is an aspect or an area that has always intrigued me. And I probably would have over the years maybe done a reasonable amount of reading around vulnerability, and initially probably got caught up between vulnerability and authenticity, and they're quite closely intertwined. And it's probably maybe taken me a little bit of time to understand the difference and also understand what drives someone's ability to be vulnerable, because I get what you're saying there, and you're not unique. And I see it a lot within business leaders. And one concept that I learned about probably 6 months ago was around strategic vulnerability and authentic vulnerability. And sometimes strategic vulnerability, you probably maybe kind of gather what that means, but ultimately, if we can display our vulnerability, the key superpower behind vulnerability is our ability to connect with other people and to show them that we're human. And sometimes if you do that strategically in a way to connect with others, it can kill it completely. And so that takes us into the realm of authentic vulnerability, which is simply the degree of how able that we feel that we can be open and share the true version of ourselves. And probably, that starts with us showing our own displays of vulnerability. So I would say to the leaders who have that desire to have that bulletproof front and protection, just start to test themselves, start to open up a little bit and open up a little bit of a window into your true soul and share a little bit of vulnerability. And I guarantee you, it will come back like a tsunami, and it totally changes the dynamic and the tone in any meeting.
Practically, what might that look like, Claire? So I'm always, the style and tone of our podcasts. I'm always keen for the listeners to take something practical away. So what would you encourage them to do during their next, team meeting, or what practically would an appropriate display of authentic vulnerability look like?
Another great question. Personally, I would show a display of vulnerability by opening up and telling a story that related to me personally, that actually showed that maybe I didn't have all the answers, or it maybe showed that I felt uneasy or scared or slightly lost, or all those fears that we're all riddled with around not feeling that we're enough, feeling that we're being judged. I would open up and tell a little story about how I found myself in a situation where this is how I was feeling, and maybe this is what I had to work at, and this is what it resulted in. And in a way, I'm kind of letting people know a little bit about me. I'm reminding others that I'm human. I'm actually no different to you. And I've gone through a process that I've learned from. And maybe by me sharing my learnings with you, it's going to help you feel that it's okay to feel like that. Um, so
Brilliant, brilliant advice. Love that. Rob can delete those pauses. I'm still getting used to this setup, and my emails are clicking through here. So, Rob, you can get rid of all of those noises and things. Claire, moving on from that, what were the emerging themes of the season as you witnessed as the listener?
Okay, so this time around, I picked up three emerging themes, and the first one was definitely around how human leadership and that purposeful, soulful human leadership is transforming lives, and really the core message that business can be a great enabler to in Bob Chapman's words, he said it can be a great enabler to heal a lot of the brokenness in the world. So there were a lot of speakers over the course of the whole season spoke about human leadership, and I tried to break it down into some sort of a structure. And if you'll bear with me while I kind of take you through this, but uh, the first one, and I have to say that that whole aspect was deafening this time around, deafening. It came through from every single speaker. But the first one was really around, I guess, understanding our impact. And what your speakers shared, I found quite shocking. And Raj, he started off by talking about the people that we report to are more important to us than a family doctor. And that was mainly relating to the amount of people who are stressed in the workplace, who are overworked. Jeff Dewing talked about the level of divorce. So the divorce rate within business because of the long hours that we're working. And Bob Chapman also reminded us that most heart attacks within the workplace take place on a Monday morning as people were coming back into work. So he followed on by talking about, he referred to a study where it showed that 88% of people would forgo a salary increase if they knew that they could fire their boss. So I think the first and foremost point that we need to do is to pause and to understand the impact as leaders and managers within organizations that we have on people's lives and people's health and people's relationships and the joy in their lives and the impact that that can trickle through to their families and society is the first and foremost point that we can learn from that.
I love
And
that, Claire. The impact of our leadership. And can I just add to that? The importance of everyone listening who's in a leadership role to understand that everyone else in the room's energy will synchronize to your energy as the leader. Lots of research now to support that. You have a direct impact on the people that you lead. You have a direct impact on the energy that you create. And ultimately, as leaders, back to that concept of CEO being the chief energy officer, it's incumbent on you to realize that how you show up will ultimately reflect itself in the team and in the organization, which comes back to the importance of our very first principle, psyche, and the self-image and the self-story, the self-discipline, the self-control that we exert every time we're with our team. And this is anchored on the very purpose of simple scaling: to inspire, connect, and enable ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. SMEs touch every corner of our society. What you do, how you show up, how you behave, how you lead, ultimately is touching every corner of our society. So it's, without overstating the importance of impact, you are impacting everyone that you come into contact with. Your energy will be mirrored in the energy of your team and ultimately in the energy of the organization. And so I love the focus on impact. What else, Claire, as a theme?
well, everything you have just said there leads you into the next bit of the whole concept of human leadership that I think that we need to consider greatly, and that is understanding ourselves better and taking that time to connect with ourselves. And again, I'm going to lean on the story that Raj told whenever uh, he spent most of his career trying to be the opposite of what he genuinely and authentically knew he really was. And he told that fantastic story about how his mother was just full of unconditional love and he carried that on from her. But in the business world, we prioritize money and power and position. And so he talked about spending his career being a victim of himself. And it was only through his own journey of exploration and really understanding himself that he really understood what sat at the very core of his being. He wasn't the only guest who talked about that, because Jeff Dewing also talked about taking time out to reflect. He talked about going bankrupt and then to being a billionaire. And he said it was the most valuable 4 or 5 months that he spent in his career. Whenever he was riddled with shame, he talked about, but he took time out to understand what was really important to him and then came back with a very different view of the world. And Philip McKernan also talked about, I'm actually going to read what he says: connect with yourself to awaken your soul, and don't stay so busy that you leave it too late. So that's the second part of that, of the lessons really that I took away. So the first one was recognize the impact that we can have. The second one is to take time out to understand who we really are. And I think then the third and final aspect of that one particular theme was weighing up the balance of strength and love. Um, Bob, he talked about how we suppress love, and love and caring and kindness is language that most people within business would sneer at. But really, we're there's problems in the world because of the lack of love that is shown in an environment where we spend so much time and connect with each other to prioritize strength. And Bob talked about how people don't feel cared for and valued today, they feel used, and people simply want to know that they matter, and how business can be a real source for healing in the world. So take time. I think it might have been Bob or Raj. It was Raj. He talked about the Martin Luther King um, approach of tough-minded and tender-hearted, and make sure that you're always checking in yourself. If you want to tap into that and display more human leadership, tap into that strength and love balance and ask yourself, maybe, is the balance even?
I love those themes, Claire. So, number one, understanding your impact and how that reverberates around your team, around your organization, around your community, society, and the economy as a whole. Again, without overstating that. The second is know thyself,
Exactly.
which really is at the essence of the mastery of life. And that's going to be an everlasting process. You know, I was reading something recently, and we land into the world, we're birthed into the world, into this body. We're given this mind, but we're not given an operating manual in terms of how we control this. And it's so powerful when you start to get curious about how your mind actually operates, and your body is just an instrument of the mind. The power of how you think determines and has an impact on how you feel, has a determination on how you act, and ultimately the results that you get. So know thyself is so powerful. And then love versus fear. And we're both parents, Claire. The Why are we different in the workplace with our team than we are as parents, where we love our children unconditionally, which means that they don't always get what they want, but we always provide what they need.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that's the same with our team. It's loving our team unconditionally without that sounding like it's language alien to the workplace. But
I think it was
I
Bob. Sorry, I think it was Bob Chapman that actually said to you, treat everybody in your business like one of your lovely daughters.
he absolutely did, and it brings something else. We've spoken about this within our workshops, something else to bear, and it's become a real bugbear of mine. It's the use of military language in the workplace and in our businesses. Let's start with even language around mission, our mission. And I know that might grate with some people, but, mission is a military term. We talk about having a vision. Where is it you want to go, or what is it you want to do? Describe that, articulate that, inspire yourself, inspire others towards it. And why do you want to go there in terms of the purpose and meaning you give to it? It's really simple. Mission just gets clouded somewhere in between the both. Even the term strategy, and I know it's ubiquitous in business, but strategy is a military term. In the context of what I just said, where are you going? Why do you want to go there? And when we come to it, their fourth principle of scaling, there's a plan how you're going to get there. Really simple. Strategies used to over amplify the importance of what you're trying to do. Whenever you either have a plan or you don't need a strategic plan. It's either this is the plan or it's not. Why does it need the prefix strategic? And then other things like having targets, again, coming from the military, beating your competition. Why would you beat your competition? Just obsess with your customer. Back to the love your customer, love them so much that you want to over deliver to them by giving them so much value. What are the other military terms that have come into our lexicon? That aren't consistent or don't resonate with ultimately delivering value to your customers through the wonderful product or service that you're delivering. And the more that you're inspired with the vision that you have, the more back to that you love your team, that you know yourself, that you recognize and understand your impact, the better the team will be equipped and energized to actually obsess with your customer and deliver value to them. Sorry, that was just my little rant.
No, you're absolutely right. And wasn't it Bob Chapman who said, I would rather go to my grave instead of being proud of the machines that I built, uh, being proud of the people who build the machines or the products or services. Take it, translate machines into anything that you actually deliver, but proud of the people and being instead of proud of the machines. So yeah, human
So,
leadership is the way forward.
well, it's all about the people. We've heard about that so much. I know you just have that naturally. It's your profession. You are wired that way. You're a champion of people, which is why I love these wrap up episodes, just in terms of the perspective that you bring. We've been involved in lots of different workshops and different summits over the last 3 months, and the resounding message from all of those and every speaker that we've listened to, every workshop that we've attended, it's all about the people. Back to the Zig Ziglar quote: "You don't build a business, you build people, and the people build a business."
Love that. And I've never heard it coming through as strong as I did than I did in that season 10.
So let's just dive a little bit deeper then. Any messages that really captured your curiosity, that sucked you in? I know you've mentioned at the outset that Raj's episode brought you to tears. Can you tell me more about that? Why was that the case?
Yeah, I probably can. And I'm probably going back into a little personal story of my own. I kind of really identified with that, I guess the persona that, or the upbringing that Raj had, because my own parents would have, they were filled me with unconditional love. And I've spoken with you about this in the past, that I have a vivid memory of walking into a boardroom and into maybe hearing a pin drop in the room, and all I wanted to do was burst through the door and say, "Oh my God, isn't it a miserable day outside? And how's everybody doing?" And I I concealed it, and I tried to behave in a way that I felt that the business expected me to behave in a more business-like way, and I was suppressing that within myself. And eventually, and I put it down to age, eventually speaking of that same boardroom, 10 years on, I would have been doing just that, opening the door of the boardroom and just being myself. And it was probably a decade later that I really understood that people valued that. People want to be in a meeting, they want to feel at ease. Once they feel at ease, and actually, I think it was maybe Bob Chapman referred to, people want to feel cared for, and whenever they feel cared for, they start to give you their gifts. And that is the kind of, maybe that comes naturally to me, but it was later in my career I suppressed that in myself, and only later in my career did I start to appreciate that it is actually valued. It's my way, but it was valued. I got better out of a meeting than someone who was kind of sitting maybe full of fear and apprehension. So I really identified with that, and I guess I got quite emotional. And you've challenged me with this. I've got quite emotional because Raj said that he wanted to tell his own mother that what he has done in the world that's important, that mattered, was because of her. And I think from memory, it was too late. By the time he went on his own journey, but I'm not going to make that same mistake.
Have you
I
done
haven't
that
done it
yet?
yet, but I haven't done it yet. And for whatever reason, it's quite hard because even myself being quite an emotional, very open person, if I find it hard, how's somebody else who is not an emotive person going to find it? So I understand it, I get it, but I'm not going to let it stand in my way because I just think that's an incredible thing to do. So I was so happy to hear Raj say that, and I was just enlightened whenever he shared his own personal journey with all of us.
Well, there's another commitment to our listeners. I love appealing to the listeners, to our audience, to do something practical at the end of each of these episodes, and I encourage you all to take time out to actually give gratitude to your parents if you're fortunate enough to have your parents still living. My own mother has dementia now, and so it's too late for me. But I did get time with her whenever she was still very much with us. So I appeal to you all. There's something, certainly on a personal note. My mother, and I shared this with Stephen Bartlett in a little sound bite, but wonderful baker. Every time you arrived at the house, she would always give you something away, a cake of bread, an apple tart, something. And one of those days that she gave me something was the last day, because she no longer has the capability to bake. But I didn't know it was the last day. So there'll be a last time with your parents, even with your kids, where they'll not want to hold your hand anymore. You'll not know that. So it's kind of giving gratitude for those moments. And what's the context in from a scaling perspective? I think, if you can start to be more human and more authentic with your family, with your parents, with your kids, well, then ultimately that's going to translate into your business, which ultimately what we're saying is going to be more uh, beneficial to the overall success of your business. So
100%. Well, I take that commitment.
good on you. Looking forward to hearing about that in the next episode. What are you going to do differently? You've mentioned this one commitment, which is something that you're going to take on board. Anything else, Claire, that you're going to do differently? And before I jump into that, something you said previously about not being at ease in that previous boardroom, where your authentic self was being suppressed, and it struck something within me, because if you're not at ease, it means you're at disease, which is disease, and nobody performs well if they're diseased. So it's being mindful of that. If your team's not at ease, then the opposite of that is diseased, and no one wants a team that's diseased.
I don't want disease.
So, yes, going back to what you're going to do differently this time around as a result of listening to this season.
Just before I get into what I'll do differently, there was another, if I may, there was another theme that was coming through, and as well as the human leadership, which I think was absolutely the number one theme, there was another theme coming through around the whole concept of experimentation. And I'm going to use Stephen Bartlett's words here. He said the exponential rate of change is accelerating, and how experimentation is becoming more and more important. And you'll recall from his podcast interview, he talked about having a full-time data scientist and a head of experimentation. And he said that if you're over 40, by the time you reach 60, we will experience 1 year of change in 3 months. And if you're over 10, by the time you reach 60, you'll experience that 3 month change in 11 days. So he talked about the importance of finding that system that will get us there, get to the end result quicker than our competitors. So I thought that was really fascinating. And actually, one thing that I want to just call out on that, just this morning, we were having a discussion around experimenting and the value of experimentation. And there's a couple of things just from that discussion that I really took away. And number one was the the bravery of the concept of stopping the line. So if you experiment with something, and we hear it a lot these days, fail fast. And if you're failing, the bravery and the courage required to, I think it's a manufacturing phrase used whenever you think about people making the widgets on the line, to stop that line is really important. And actually, as a leader, to encourage the bravery, but also to call out the people who have got the courage to say, this isn't working, stop it, or let's stop it and try something different, is really important. But I think the second thing, and I'm actually going to take you to our own book, and you talk about the learnings of entering into new unknown markets. It was particularly around different regions, and how you called out whenever it wasn't working and you had to then explore an alternative. And I just want to, if I could, talk about the culture. Alex Osterwalder said, create a world-class culture of experimentation. And in our book, we talk about this was a culture where lively debate was encouraged and expected. We analysed how we delivered our work, we found new ways to collaborate, we learned best practice, and as time went on, we dedicated time to learn about ourselves and each other. We laughed a lot, we built strong connection and stronger confidence in each other. And that was in page 271 of a Simple Scaling book. And there to me lies the value in experimentation and building that culture of experimentation. Think of the impact that that has on the team, and you experienced that.
Yeah, you brought me back there, Claire, to a wonderful time in my own career. Which brings me to the difference between management and leadership. It was Peter Drucker, I believe, who said, managers do do things right. Leaders do the right things, including discerning whenever something is not working and it's time to stop and change direction. And ultimately, that's incumbent on leaders to be able to discern that and have that courage to stop and change their business model if it's not working, to use that word, to pivot in other directions. Don't wait on trauma to hit your business, like a COVID event, like the global financial crisis, before you make the change that intuitively, in your gut you need to make, but you're over rationalizing why you're continuing to persist. And there's a difference between actually persistence and continued persistence because you're nearing the goal, and not stopping then whenever you're 3 feet from goal, as Napoleon said. and the point where actually you need to stop because it's simply not working and the direction of travel isn't going to uh, gift to you what you're trying to do.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I guess it's understanding when to do that. When it
Yeah.
starts to feel blindy or hard,
Well, that,
or
well,
too many problems in your inbox, or
Well, again, it's back to the importance of knowing thyself, to being able to tune into your body, to be able to tune into that sixth sense of being able to feel when something's right and something's not right. If you're just numbed out the whole time, you won't. But it's taking that quiet time and sitting with a challenge and then discerning whether actually we need to persist because we're close to what we've set out, or actually this is not working and we have persisted down the wrong track for too long. Now we need to stop. We need the courage to pull the line and change direction. So it's a brilliant insight, Claire. Back to the question of what you're going to do differently.
okay. So what's important for me is that I just do a little recap on where I was the last time. This first one's quite ironic because one of my commitments from the last wrap up was to create a set of guidelines around communication in order to free time up to do work, to do more work. And ironically, I didn't get the time for that. So that's one I am going to carry forward into the next wrap up. The other commitment that I made at the end of the last wrap up was to explore my role in changing the small number of female CEOs out there. Susie Ma talked about it, and instead of diving in blindly, I wanted to just take a step back and understand where what my beliefs were, and how I think I could have impacted change. So I actually did. I wrote an article, and that really helped me to solidify my own thinking. And um, what that actually revealed to me that I'm passionate about inclusion. And the key thing that struck me was, you know, 6% of CEOs in the UK are female, but 90% of non-binary individuals are experiencing harassment or discrimination in work, and 3 times as many men die from suicide each year than women. So the whole um the whole equity system, if you like, isn't working for anyone. So I guess that really helped me to understand that my beliefs are around inclusion, and there are a lot of in business, probably a lot of minority groups that certainly I would be driven to make whatever the difference is irrelevant, and actually to include everyone. And I think that the only way that we're going to change the equity system as it stands at the moment, which is clearly well and truly broken, is actually to rewire our collective thinking around inclusion for everyone. So there's more work to be done there, but I think my first step is really understanding what my own thinking and beliefs are on the subject, uh, before I can do stuff there. I'm following through. I'm taking steps towards my previous commitment the last time.
I think
But
it's
that's
beautifully aligned as well, because what I'm hearing from you is that essentially, regardless of gender, color, neurodivergence, the the approach is one of unconditional love,
yeah.
which in order to do that, you have to know thyself and where some of your self-limiting beliefs might show up. And ultimately, back to the very first point of truly human leadership is recognizing the impact of how you show up resonates and manifests in how your team show up, and ultimately how your customers receive your product or service. So it's, for me, there's absolute alignment with what you've said, and I'm going to credit you with with an action that you give to me back to the importance of communicating appropriately within the organization. I have a habit of, just when ideas come to me, I will just share those by virtue of a voice message or a WhatsApp into a team channel, and almost expect that because now it's out of my head, that it's in a repository that people are going to act on. And that's not fair on those who are receiving that. And we we agreed internally that we would set up our improvements channel, and that was the repository for me and for anyone within the team to share their improvement ideas whenever those ideas arrived, whatever stage of day, night, weekend. But that was the appropriate place, and now we've got checkpoints within in terms of appropriate timeframes to actually assess those improvement ideas. So I credit that with you. You did yourself a disservice by saying you hadn't actioned anything on that, but so
Understand.
Claire,
Do you want to know what I'm going to do this differently this time?
I do indeed.
So this is down to Dan Sullivan's podcast, which I really enjoyed, and I make a commitment to review 2023 in terms of those three categories he spoke about. He talked about free days, he talked about focus days, and he talked about buffer days. So I'm quite fascinated to look at my calendar over the last year to identify the percentage of buffer days with the view of reducing those buffer days and making them more focus days. So that's one of my commitments. And the second one I commit to is also I'm going to invite 10 people to help me to define my unique ability. I think I'm getting closer to understanding. But the question I'm going to ask is, if I was doing my best work, what would that be? So those are my two commitments, and those are thank you to Dan Sullivan.
Love those, Claire. Brilliant. I'm just making a note of these. So
I'm definitely not getting off the hook.
you're not. Before we move into our close, Claire, is there anything that we haven't touched upon today that you would like to share?
Just one message that really landed with me was from Stephen Bartlett, and the question you asked him was, "What makes a great investment?" And I thought it was fascinating, his response. He told the story about how whenever he was young in his career and he met with the investor, and the investor, I'll not repeat his language, but the investor said, he said, to be honest, I don't really know much about your industry. I don't know much about your product, but I'm going to invest in you because you're a great guy and I know you'll do something good. And he walked away thinking, oh my, I can't believe that. But he said probably, years later, he understands it. And what he talked about was a great product with a bad entrepreneur is a poor investment. And there was three things that he called out, and he said, I need to trust the person. He said, I don't really know much about the product or the industry either most of the time, but I do know good character. And he looks for trust in terms of he trusts that the person would pick up the phone and tell him the truth. Um, if even if it was bad, uh, perseverance, so that he needs to understand that they would persevere even when times get tough. And the last one was the humility to say that they've got it wrong or they don't know, and to go back and continually learn. So the ability to tell the truth, the ability to persevere, and the ability to remain humble and continue to learn. So that I just really like that.
Well, that resonates strongly with a wonderful old Jim Rohn quote that always stuck with me, is that we attract success whenever we become attractive. And I don't mean in our looks here. We don't have to go out and get more hair gel. What we're saying here is attractive by virtue of your values, by virtue of your character, is exactly what that investor was investing in when he initially invested in Stephen Bartlett, and how he discerned the success in the context of Stephen Bartlett's social chain. And so clearly Stephen Bartlett presented himself as an attractive person in the context of his values and his ambition. And which really brings me to the point is, in all of this, you need to work harder on yourself than you're currently doing on your business.
Yeah. Yeah. And those three things really important if you're out there seeking investment into your business. Ask yourself those three questions.
Absolutely. So, Claire, to wrap up, what were your favorite three timeless takeaways from this season?
Love this question. And I'm going to start by, I've mentioned it earlier on. The first one is from Bob Chapman. And he said that people share their gifts with you whenever they feel cared for. And in particular, he used that quote: "I won't go to my grave feeling proud of the products and services we built. I'll go to my grave proud of the people who built our products and services." And whenever we make people our purpose, we can heal a lot of the brokenness in the world. So, one of my favorite takeaways is most certainly from Bob Chapman.
Any others?
Yes. My second favorite takeaway was from Jeff Dewing. And he talked again about vulnerability. A vulnerability will be your superpower. So being open to being wounded was how he put it. Let empathy eat your ego and be unashamedly curious all of the time. Was my second favorite takeaway. And my third, this was probably the message that landed the most out of all of the episodes I listened to. And it's one from Stephen Bartlett around happiness. You'll know what I'm going to say here. He says, "Our happiness depends on our own expectations about how our life is going at the current time." And he told that great story of whenever he was sitting in first class in the plane and the lady and her husband got on and they were gasping, "Look at this," and looking around in complete wonder. And he said, that was him a while ago. In fact, he can recall the times he was sitting in economy thinking that I've made it, when he was flying from Africa over to the UK. So it's all around our own expectations around how our life is going at the current time. And what sits at the very core of that is our ability to find gratitude in even the simplest of things. So brilliant.
Love those, Claire. I want to thank you for making these wrap ups so special. Our 10 wrap ups culminating in 100 guest episode interviews. I always love your energy. I want to thank you for giving up your time to really discern what resonated and what's important for our listeners in the context of this season. And again, your wonderful insights. I really appreciate it. Today has absolutely flown as ever. I look forward to seeing you again in season 11 for a wrap up then, where I am also looking forward to knowing how you progress against your commitments. So in the meantime, take care.
Thank you very much.